So today we're going to talk about case study number one. First of all, I have some thoughts, the just some real quick hit stuff that is that just to make it super easy for you to write a paper that's super easy for your peers and audience members, including me, to make better use of your papers, as well as how to get better sources. I'm going to pull up the library website again real quick and go through that. And then I have a TED Talk. It's a lot of fun. This guy is really angry. It's so it's a TEDx at Southern Methodist University, and this gentleman no longer works at Southern Methodist University. And I want you to keep that in mind as you're watching the TED Talk, because he throws his whole institution under the bus, and it's a lot of fun to watch. And I very much understand, having worked at a place that deserved to be thrown under the bus publicly like that. I find it a lot of fun. I think it's a really great time. He did find a couple good faculty positions. He's now at Mississippi or Mississippi State, so he got different work. But yeah, he's no longer at SMU. What and so then we'll step back a little bit and look at some of the concepts that I think are the most important from the chapter about what makes for ethical leadership. There's a lot more in there. You'll have to read that on your own, because we're going to make some time at the end to step back and look at an example. I've been reading this book called Algorithms of Oppression. It's by the woman Professor Sophia Noble, who was the speaker yesterday at the event that I posted, Beyond the Social Dilemma. She was far and away the star of the show. If you're still interested in getting extra credit for that, by the way, you can still do so even if you missed it. I recommend that you do so. The Social Dilemma is a fine film. I think you'll get a lot more out of this discussion. I think the discussion is super fascinating. And the link to that is now under the extra credit. The link to that is now under the extra credit module on the Canvas page. By the way, if you didn't notice, I created a module just for extra credit items. A couple of them may or may not show up for you. For instance, East High, I only assigned it to the people, retroactively assigned it to the people who came to the East High event. And so you may not see that. If you do, it's not for you because you missed it already, but that's already at Come and Con. For those of you who did come, that was great. Thank you. But there are still extra credit opportunities out there for you, either via the Social Dilemma or the panel, which again you can watch at your convenience now, as well as the video case studies over at the Cengage webpage. If you're having trouble finding those and you want to do those, please be in touch. But I mean, I think I just don't know what your view of that portal really looks like. But I haven't had students come to me and say they can't find it. But if you can't find it, please come see me. Anyway, so her book, which I've been reading and also listening to the audiobook of, has what I think is a really good example of one of the topics that we cover in the third part of the lecture, which is what makes for ethical leadership. Anyway, so first let's do feedback on case study number one. I think there's some important nudges. I was pretty happy with your first papers, especially as first papers. I think you did great. I really do. I really do. I think they were a solid batch, but there's always room for improvement. And I think as a group, there's some trends and tendencies that I really want to call out and make sure that everyone is on board with doing a slightly better job of avoiding. So first, be skeptical, but not cynical. Be skeptical, but not cynical. Right? So I want to start with be skeptical. A lot of you were pretty excited about the decisions that the company in your case study has made in that area. A lot of you were pretty excited about the decisions that your company had made in that area. And I think in the cases where there was excitement there, those were generally pretty well justified. I mean, I didn't really disagree with that conclusion. But what I want to encourage you to do is to bring a more skeptical eye and ask if there are limits or hesitations or qualifiers to that good news. Right? There is good news out there. There is good news out there, right? This textbook is packed with examples of good news of companies doing the right thing, doing right by employees, doing right by external stakeholders. And some of you are, picked cases where the conclusion really is like, yeah, that's there's reason to be encouraged by that corporate behavior. Absolutely. And I'm not telling you not to draw those conclusions. By all means, if that's what you see, draw that conclusion. But if your paper is 100% sunshine and light, maybe step back and ask whether that 100% sunshine and light conclusion is really warranted. I encourage you all to be just a little bit more skeptical when you're bringing good news as the conclusion of your paper. Right? There's usually a caveat or three. There's usually a problem or two to identify with, like, yeah, they did XYZ, it's great. They brought up employee benefits. They brought in really good employee pay, but they've also had trouble in this area with employee relations. And here's what that looks like. And here's what they've done about it. Right. And so your goal is to create a somewhat more nuanced, not balanced. I don't want artificial sort of he said, she said, artificial 50-50 balance. I want, if your answer is it's half good, half bad, and that's your honest conclusion, that's fine too. But most of you are going to say it's better it's more good than bad, or it's more bad than good. Right. And when you're saying it's more good than bad, that's fine, but I don't think there's a story in any of these cases where it really is like just total good news, get on your soapbox and talk about how awesome it is. Right. And so a paper that does that just seems like that's a little too simplistic. And I want you to dig a little deeper and say, is there at least some caveat or holdback that is warranted there? And cutting the other direction, a number of you, not as many, but a number of you also wrote just deeply cynical papers, just really sort of like, this company is garbage. And, thankfully you didn't come out and say this company is garbage. Don't say that. Let's use more professional language. But implicitly, that's what you said. It's just, this company is garbage. Now there's one or two where that I'm kind of persuaded that that's actually the case. But there is at least in most cases that's not really the case. And the sort of the automatic, deep, unabashed categorical cynicism is also generally going to be unwarranted. And even in the cases where I really think that sort of this company is a bad faith actor. For those of you who at least flip through the cases, you could probably guess one company that I definitely think is probably best described as a bad faith actor. Then there are still arguments to be made and considered for some of that company's behavior. Arguments to be made and considered for that company's behavior. What did those arguments look like? And I don't insist you be persuaded by them. You don't have to. You could say they say XYZ is why they're doing these things, or this particular decision is justified in the name of Q, right? You don't have to be persuaded by it, but at least consider it, or at least acknowledge the extent to which there is some truth to that claim. So what I'm urging you to move toward is more nuance, more subtlety in your papers, which is the difference between sort of cartoon heroes and cartoon villains and real life people. Right, cartoon heroes and cartoon villains and real life companies. Right, because we're dealing in these cases in real life companies. Okay, what else would I urge you to do? Help me help you. Help me help you. As I started to write this slide, I was like, oh man, I need an image to represent this. What image can I? And I figured I'd wind up, settling on like one hand reaching out for the other or something like that. And then the little PowerPoint design suggestion suggested this image with this layout, and I said yes. Because the message I want to send with this slide is don't throw your message out to sea hoping that I'll find it. Don't throw your message out to sea hoping that I'll find it. Instead, take this bottle out of the water and hit me, and take the message out of the bottle and then hit me over the head with your message. Don't hit me over the head with your bottle. Hit me over the head with your message. Don't just throw it out like, oh, it's in there somewhere. Don't make me search the ocean looking for your message. Make it just incredibly obvious to me what it is exactly what it is that you're saying. And how is it that you're going to do that? How is it that you're going to do that? Explicitly identify which question it is you're answering. Explicitly identify which question it is that you're answering. Ideally, do this on your title page. Ideally, do this on your. Now, I didn't suggest this to you before. But as I read a lot of papers, I just expected that to be implicitly clear. But I think it'll just make it a lot easier, and not just for me, but for your fellow students, your fellow student evaluators when you're going through the revisions. It'll just be a lot easier if you know exactly which question it is that you're trying to answer. And the best place to do that, the best place to make that identification is on the title page. Give us a clear thesis and preview. And I want these to be exactly where a reader expects to find them, which is the last two sentences of your introduction. The last two sentences of your introduction. The second to last sentence of your introduction should be your thesis, and the last sentence of your introduction should be a preview of the main points that you're going to have. So after your attention getter, and by the way, this is a little bit of an aside. This is not as essential. This is not as essential for the essay, but I want you all to strive a little bit harder for an attention getter that really like demands the reader's attention. Right? I don't want you to sort of like quietly stand next to the reader and say, today we're going to talk about Acme Inc. I want you to walk right up and shake the reader's hand and say, "Hello." And then I have a story to tell you. And then tell us a story. There are a lot of ways to start an introduction in a way that gets the reader's attention. The safest and most consistent way is to tell a brief, unique, attention-grabbing story. Kirsten was not sure how she was going to pay for college. Then she started working at Acme Inc. And 3 months later, they started providing tuition reimbursement for all of their employees. Now Kirsten is a junior in whatever your major is, right? Is a junior at MSU Denver studying, right, and is headed towards a successful career with free of college debt. Just a little vignette like that, a little story that captures one of the points that you're going to be talking about in that essay. A little story, a little vignette. Okay, so you've got your vignette, your little 3 to 5 sentences, just a very, very brief story. Telling a good, compelling story that briefly is a little hard to do. Please try. So you've got your little story to get our attention. And then, this is just, Kirsten's story is just one example of how Acme Inc. has made all the right decisions when it comes to employee benefits and compensation. Right. To illustrate this, I'll talk about their bump in pay, their the other benefits that they've provided to their employees and the benefits that the company has seen from these changes in personnel policies. Thesis: company is doing everything right by their employees. Preview: pay, benefits, and benefits the company from these changes. Right? Clear. Boom, boom. And then your first main point had better be pay. A few of you, probably 5 to 10 of you, had a preview, and then your essay had different main points. Like, that's. I mean, if you write it in order and you think you're going to talk about those main points, you just write your intro to sort of clear your head and get a sense of where you think the essay is going to go, and then you go do the research and you pull it out and you wind up with different main points. That's fine. That's great. Just come back and change the preview so the reader knows what your main points are actually going to be. Each section should then have a clear topic sentence. Each section should then have a clear topic sentence. In one sentence, what is that section going to prove? In one sentence, what is that section going to prove? Right, so to come back to our hypothetical Acme Inc. example, imagine that third main point about here's the benefits to the company that this better treatment of these employees have brought them, right? That first sentence of that third section should say something to the effect of, by providing better pay and benefits to their employees, Acme Inc. has seen tremendous growths in productivity and customer goodwill. Just one sentence. And then you put that at the very beginning of that section, and then, okay, great. This is what this section is going to prove, is that it has benefited the company by providing better productivity and better customer goodwill. I also encourage you to use section headings. Use section headings. And the section headings should just be brief, 3 to 8 word little summaries of what the topic is going to be. Bold them, underline them, break them out, make it super incredibly. So you've been working on this essay for hours. You had better put several hours into these essays. You've been working on this essay for hours. You know what's in there. But think about the reader and think about all the ways that you can just make it much, much easier for the reader to say, okay, now here's the section on pay. Now here's the section on benefits. Now here's the section on benefits to the company. Right. Your textbook in this section, in this area, is a great example. Right. So as you're flipping through chapter 11, there's this heading that says, that's not going to show it because it can't tell that it's a human. Right, so see that big purple line, you probably can't read it. You see that big purple line there? The textbook is filled with these things, right? That big purple line says ethical leadership and organizational culture. You know what they talk about in that section? Ethical leadership and organizational culture. It's super helpful. It's super helpful. So think about your reader. In all of this stuff, think about your reader and think about making it just super, super clear. How do I get this message out of the ocean and then out of the bottle, and just stinking hand it to them? It's a lot easier that way. Let's talk about which sources I want you to be using. I want you to have 8 total sources. And I want them to be recent enough for why you're using them. Eight total sources, and I want them to be recent enough for why you're using them. So if you're talking about why Acme, how Acme changed its pay and benefits policies, and you're citing something from 2013, did they still have those pay and benefit policies? Right. I mean, if your case is really focused in on that change that happened in 2013, fine. I mean, I guess at that point that citing those sources is fine. But if you want to say Acme Inc. has not had or made this change, but has good pay and benefits for their employees, I'm going to want some, 2019, 2020, 2021 sources to show that this is still how they're paying their people, right? So Zappos is one of the cases in here. Spoiler alert for those of you who are going to do Zappos for your second paper. Zappos is no longer organized really in the way that the chapter talks about. You're going to have to update your research on that stuff. So if you're relying on 2014, 2015, 2016 sources for and talking about the way a company is being run in 2021, some stuff may have happened in the meantime. So make sure you update that. Okay, so those are the total sources and the sort of the date of the sources, but I want to talk about the kinds of sources to use. I want to talk about the kinds of sources to use. Now I said academic sources, but I want to be incredibly specific here. I want you to use peer-reviewed journal articles. Peer-reviewed journal articles. And I want you to use the library databases to find them. I don't know why these are out of order. I'm going to have to sort this out for the next class. Apologies. A minimum of 3 peer-reviewed journal articles. And here, for these, sometimes older is fine. Now, I don't mean 1962. That's a little too old for almost anything. But I mean like a 2005 or journal article about the sort of the benefits that accrue to companies in, let's say, productivity. We're back on my hypothetical Acme pay and benefits example, right? And so you have a source from 2005 and another source from 2009 about how, when companies boost pay and benefits, then they see productivity increases and increases in customer goodwill. Or at least they tend to under these circumstances. And you bring in fine. That's probably still true today. I mean, think about why you're using those sources. Is this a broad theory in terms of what tends to happen when companies do X versus Y? Sure, a little bit older, especially in the context of an academic source, is going to be a pretty valid source there. That's going to work out just fine. But a lot of you, when it came to academic sources, are just out there in the woods, by which I mean the internet search engine of your choice. Right? You're on Bing and Google and DuckDuckGo looking for this stuff. Which I love. I love me some DuckDuckGo. I will duck around on the internet all day long. By the way, I think they underused that pun like way too much, but I think it should be, I think it should be go duck it, and so on, right? I think they could have a lot of fun with that. But I will futz around on the internet looking for stuff all day. But when it's time to write an academic paper, I don't go looking on the wild, wild west of the internet for my academic sources. That's not where I find it. I find it in library databases. I'll cheat a little bit and use Google Scholar sometimes because a lot of the stuff I'm doing goes across like a whole bunch of disciplines. Like I'm looking at stuff that draws from the humanities and the social sciences and the business disciplines. There's no one database that captures all of that. The library, actually, you can just use the search bar of the library to find stuff like that sometimes, and that actually works a lot better than it should. They make it really easy for you. But still, I want you to go into a specific database and look for peer-reviewed journal articles. But also, and it's important to note this, I want you not to have just academic sources. And I say at least 3 academic sources and at least 8 total sources. But that doesn't mean I want 8 journal articles in there and nothing else. I mean, if you feel the need to cite 8 journal articles and you've got 4 or 5 other sources that I'm about to talk about, that's great. That's fine. There's no maximum on journal articles, but you need other types of sources. Specifically, you need credible journalistic sources. Credible journalistic sources. By which I mean newspapers, and I don't not hack tabloid newspapers, right? Like the New York Daily News, the New York Post. I mean, if you must, but no, like real credible newspapers that have really high journalistic standards. I'm sorry, what was that?
The Daily Bugle.
Yeah. I mean, obviously not the Onion, like the Daily Current, right, which is spelled like the fruit. The sure, but the no, like credible daily newspapers. The now some of those, there are now it's there are a few sources that you won't find in the databases, also magazines. Are a few sources that you won't find in the databases that you can find on the internet. But before you cite it, look at the about, and then look at the Wikipedia page about it, and that sort of thing, right? And say, is this a real newspaper or a fake newspaper? Is this a credible mainstream newspaper, or is it a hack partisan paper, right? Same with magazines. Is this an actual magazine, or is it like? And so the best way to know that it counts as one of these things is to find it in the library databases. If you've not heard of the source, if you don't know what the source is, obviously Forbes, Business Week, Time Magazine, Newsweek, these are, the magazines that you've heard of, great, use those. Newspapers that you've heard of, great, use them. If you're not sure if the Chicago Tribune is a real newspaper, yes, it is, fantastic newspaper. Look it up. Then that's when you go duck something. Trade publications as well. Now these can be a little trickier. But when in doubt, go look it up. When in doubt, get out, open a new tab next to your database search and say, is this a real source? Is this a credible source? And if so, then it should have some sort of internet presence that helps you find that. And don't trust them telling you we're the leading we're the leading weekly e-newsletter for the card stock industry. Like maybe they are, maybe they aren't. Find someone else who tells you that. Again, when in doubt, look them up. So I'm going to come back to the library databases. We're going to spend a lot more. Apparently, we're spending a lot more time on this than I thought we were going to. That's okay. This to me is more important than chapter 11. We will at least get through the TED talk because that guy's hilarious. Right. So I want you to go to library.auraria.edu and then go to the databases list. Just business. I'm interested in business. So give me a database that's all about business. How about Business Source Premier? Oh, I remember Professor Herman said that, and the little stars there to remind me. Right, Business Source Premier. Sorry, little Zotero weirdness. For those of you who've used Zotero and have figured out how the proxy thing works, it's not important. But okay, so now instead of Acme Inc., let's actually go to Starbucks. A number of you for your first paper wrote something about Starbucks employees benefits, right? So let's go Starbucks and benefits and see what we find. 305 sources. I think that'll be enough. Right? Starbucks to raise wages up to 15%. 2016, that's okay. If I can't find something newer, maybe I use that one. Right? Wall Street Journal, that's a credible source. Retail Traffic. That sounds like a trade publication. I'm not sure. So I'm gonna want to click on the broad internet and look for retail traffic if this is one that I want to use, right? This doesn't look like it's about what I'm trying to do though. Starbucks expands mental health benefits, offers therapy to all US workers. Wow, that looks like a good source. 2020 Forbes, bing. Right. This is a duplicate, by the way. Ruth Imo, Forbes 316, Ruth Imo, Forbes 316. Sometimes there's duplicates. Employee Benefit News, again, sounds like a trade publication. November 2019. Expands fertility benefits to cover surrogacy boost reimbursements, right? We'll now have access to up to $30,000 for fertilities. Wow. I don't think MSU provides that. That's a lot. That's really cool. Offers all employees access to free therapy. I would not, by the way, don't stack sources and say, oh, I've got to find 5 periodical sources. And okay, so all I'm going to do is have all these ones from the spring of 2020 talking about access to free therapy, and then have like 3 sources, 3 of my 5 journalistic sources talk about that. That's no, fine. Just use one, and then look for other topics to talk about. Offering a meditation app to employees, fast casual. That's just barely at the minimum level of credibility, but I'll take it. $250 million in worker benefits after tax cut. Again, Bloomberg, very credible. 2018. Okay, great. I'm starting. This is easy. This is fish in a barrel, and I don't have to worry about whether these are credible sources. There are enough credible sources on here that I don't have to ask, is this a credible source that I'm working at? Okay. Okay, but how do I use this specifically to get scholarly sources, right? I check this box right here, and I'm going to zoom way in just so you can see it for sure. Right. Limit to scholarly peer-reviewed journals. And then it updates it. Customer preferences versus managerial decision-making in open innovation communities. I don't know what this is about. I have to click on that and see. Oh, library patronage, not what I'm talking about. Why corporate governance deserve, oh, this is William Starbuck. So that's not super relevant. But here I may have the wrong search terms. Right? Creating a unique blend, total rewards at Starbucks. Right? So this seems like, okay, this is more on topic, but this is 2004. So the scholar, in this case, it's not a theoretical study about, whether benefits lead to more productivity. It's somebody talking about Starbucks specific benefits package, as it was the case in 2000. That's 17 years ago. That's 17 years. A lot of you weren't even in school yet when this was published, right? So like, why this is so that this it's not current enough to use this to talk about, Starbucks gets benefit XYZ because of their benefits package. You're going to have to take again, the strategic value of their branding strategies in 2006. Like, I'm not sure. Big data, that might have something, right? And so you might say, well, okay, how do I make it easier on myself? Let's limit this to, let's say, for the scholarly stuff, let's at least say 2015 or newer is better. So again, this one, right? So if you want to talk about the fair trade angle in Starbucks, if that's part of your paper, right? Then maybe that you go here as well. Maybe you're arguing that Starbucks is treating their employees well, and by employees you also mean their suppliers and their employees, right? Or treating people well. Maybe you could say, I forget exactly how the questions are phrased. Maybe you sneak that into this discussion and you say, okay, the smallholder farmers, they're not their direct employees, but indirectly it's a similar sort of question. And so let's talk about this as well, right? 2020, that's pretty good. I'm gonna get like 35 Starbucks papers because of this. So, but again, I've probably got the wrong keywords here. So what I want productivity and make it more specific. Let's make it overall compensation. Now I have 278 sources. Labor productivity and labor compensation. Wow, that's a good study. And that's even still keeping the 2015 minimum, right? Managing employee grievances and grievances, we're not that interested. Determinants of labor, well, MENA countries, that's not us. bonus compensation and productivity, evidence from Indian manufacturing plant level data. Well, not super, necessarily super. So we've got a lot to whittle down here. So let's say retail. I'm only interested in the effect of compensation on productivity in the retail context. Oh, okay, that limit is too far. Anyway, as you can see, I'm doing this live. I did not. I mean, I started just a little bit, but I'm not. I mean, I want you to see the sort of the actual dead ends and tinkering that you have to do here. This is not. I mean, this part of the process should probably take you 20, 30 minutes, half an hour, 40 minutes, an hour to find like, okay, now I've at least got 6 or 7 sources that I'm really happy with. Let me write the essay, come back, figure out where I need another source or two, and then I can have really specific keywords and track that down. And that's how I'll get my 8th. That's how I'm gonna get my 7th and 8th. That's an okay way to write. But start here, tinker with this a little bit, play with it a little bit, and then really find these sources. And then you actually kind of got to read them. I hate to report, but so anyway, back to the PowerPoint. So those newspapers, magazines, and trade publications that you find in library databases, that's going to be the best way to get your sources. Now, if you struggle with the library database, the librarians are super helpful. It's hard to identify a group of people in the whole universe that are more helpful than librarians. So hit that little chat window and say, please help. I'm looking for XYZ. What am I doing? What am I doing wrong, etc. And they're just super, super, super helpful. I still do that. I'm a professional researcher. I still do that. Or if you have to resort to internet searching, don't do that for journal articles. Get your journal articles from the database. And if this database isn't enough, we have so many other databases that you can start digging into. But if you're, let's say you're really interested in a specific part of the story that you want to talk about, you're like, I can't find anything in the database. Let me go see what the wild west of the internet has to offer. Great, as long as the sources that you produce are peer-reviewed journal articles, newspapers, magazines, or trade publications, credible, any of these, right? Then you're in okay shape. So I bring this up because there was a lot of sources to avoid. Oh, I really have to get in here and change this. You're gonna watch me change it. And then we're gonna do this. Okay. So what sources should I be avoiding? That I saw a lot of, right? And for this, as I've said, generic internet searches, that's at least a yellow light. That's not a red light, but it's at least yellow, like slow your roll. It's like just slow down a little bit and say, do I really need that? And if so, anything that you find that way, be cautious about, because every single problematic source I found on here was except for one category of problematic sources is not available in the library databases. But it is available on the internet. Company sources. The number one low quality source of information that I found in these papers was the companies talking about how great they are. Anybody see the problem with that? Anybody want to unmute and explain a little bit for those who might not? I see some no's. No, I do not. Okay, so imagine you go to the MSU Denver website for information about whether MSU Denver has a good college of business. The most credible thing we say on our website about the quality of our college of business is that other people have vouched for our college of business. Everything else you can if there's an objective factual claim, like sure, then. But like we're about to change our marketing webpage to say that we are the top marketing department in the state in terms of getting you career ready. And I actually think that's true. I don't think the member of the web team who came up with that idea is wrong at all. I think we are the best at we teach more useful industry relevant skills on a per class basis than any other department of marketing in the state that I'm aware of, and I'm sure period, right? But how do you measure that? How do you measure it? Well, it hasn't been measured, right? And it hasn't been there is no third party certification of that. So like I mean, I think it's good marketing. It has the benefit of being true, but I think we're going to put it out there because it's good marketing, right? In contrast, the fact that we are accredited by the AACSB says that outside experts have looked at our College of Business and said, that's a quality College of Business. That's a quality College of Business. We have been, like a good journal article, we have been peer reviewed and found to be of high quality. Right. So that is the difference between just listening to what someone says about themselves and listening to outside experts who've looked at a situation. Now, if a company, every company says that they behave ethically. Every company says that they have great pay and benefits. Walmart will tell you that they have great pay and benefits, right? McDonald's will tell you that they have great pay and benefits. Actually, McDonald's is getting a lot better that way. The Walmart is too, actually, slowly. They'll all tell you that they have really good environmental responsibility, right? Do you think you should listen to Monsanto tell you about whether Roundup is good for the environment? Right? Should you even Starbucks, which I think is much more on the sort of the good corporate actor end of the scale than Monsanto, right? Should you listen to Starbucks when they tell you that they have world leading industry leading pay and benefits? No, no. Why should they have? You need a journalist who's looked at the situation to vouch for that claim, because or a scholar who's looked at the situation to vouch for that claim, because otherwise it's just puffery, it's just marketing. So if you're citing a company website as one of your 8 sources, real problem. If you're citing a company website as an additional source to make a point about, the company claims XYZ, but that's really not true, I think that's a fine way to use the paper. Don't count it as one of your sources. Don't count it as one of your sources. So do not rely on what a company says about itself to demonstrate that is what is actually going on with the company. Press releases are a big problem, and this is an especially big problem because even the academic databases will include them. Even the academic databases will sometimes include them. LexisNexis, which is my go-to source for news coverage, includes press releases. Business Source Complete includes press releases. How do you know it's a press release? Well, the name of the source is something like PR Newswire. That's the #1 distributor of press releases that you're going to find in these databases. So if you see it's from PR Newswire, that just means it's a press release. Now, if you're looking at a press release critically to say, as an artifact of communication that is designed to advance the company's interests, and you're not counting it as one of your 8 sources, but you're bringing that in to say, the company says XYZ, but here, let's say, Acme has a big scandal, somebody loses a finger in one of their factories, right? And Acme had, and you're like, oh, it was such a big scandal that Acme had to make a press release talking about all of the how committed they are to safety the next day to try to help smooth over the press coverage. And then you cite that press release. That's a fine use of a press release, but that's not really one of your 8 sources to really illustrate what's actually going on with Acme. Content marketing and most blogs. a lot of you will have a question uh, about a legal issue or a medical issue, and you'll go hit the internet. This is lots, not you people, just people specifically, right? A lot of people will say, what's the law on, you know, how is child support calculated in Colorado? You Google that. One of the first things you're going to find is, among the first results you're going to find, going to be a bunch of Colorado-based law firms who are happy to tell you how child support is calculated in Colorado. Why do they do that? Did anybody want to unmute?
They want to get your business and they want you to pay them to take care of your issue.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Monica. This blog post by them, this website by them is a form of marketing. It's called content marketing. You create content that's of potential interest to your potential clients, and you put it out on the internet, and you search engine optimize the heck out of it, so that when people search for keywords that will bring them to your law firm, to your medical office, right, to your public relations firm, to your environmental consultancy, right? What are the effects of Roundup on the environment? That, of course, that's too crowded. That's too many people are fighting for that debate. But what are the if you just Google sort of what are the effects on productivity for employee pay and benefits, all of a sudden a bunch of HR consultancies are going to be in your search results because they're going to have these blog entries or these websites that have an answer to that, and they're not terrible answers typically, but they're another source of biased information because produced by people whose bias is getting you in the front door. Most blogs as well avoid. A lot of them are content marketing, but a lot of blogs are just people blowing off steam. People who aren't really experts. So until you have a certain level of expertise in an area to be able to evaluate whether and in what ways somebody is credible, then evaluating just a random internet source like a blog is just going to be too difficult. And that's not that you're not smart enough. You just don't have the requisite background information in environmental chemistry and engineering, right? Or you don't have the background information you probably have better background information, almost all of you, and some of you a lot better in human resource management, right? But still, I mean, like, you're not Professor Gilliard, right? Like, you're not at the level where you could, like, oh, these people really actually know what they're talking about. Like, you're not, you need a certain amount of expertise to be able to vet sources like this, and it's just typically not something that you're not going to have. So I just stay away from these for the most part because they're just not going to be helpful enough for you. Starting for the second case study and the revised version of the case study, don't cite the textbook. The textbook is a great source of background information. But go find other sources. A few of you cited it kind of heavily, like 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 times. And like that's really not a good look. But it's not that I mean, even every single one of those that I saw, there were other good sources in there too. It was just like, I don't know where else to get a source for this claim, and so I'm going to cite the textbook. Like, no, go find the source. And the textbook is actually going to have a list of sources that will tell you what kinds of information you should be looking for. If you're like, oh, how would one support that kind of claim? Ah, well, the textbook has a good example of that. Well, let's go find another one that looks like that, and then I have a source. Don't cite other students' homework. This seems obvious, but it's a number of you cited somebody else's case study, somebody else's slide deck. Some of the work that was cited was at least like MBA work. And, you know, that's not so bad, but I, until something is at least a master's thesis or a PhD thesis or a journal article, that's not an academic source. That's not, and it's not a credible journalistic source either. Paper mills. A couple of you cited work from that were like one was an example essay. It was like, come to us and we will write. And here's an example, a great example of the quality of work that we produce when you pay us to write your paper. Right. And so at the top, it says, it'll say, you know, this is an example of a paper, the kind of paper that you can expect from us. Don't do that. Don't do that. Chegg is the biggest offender, CHEGG. But there are others. Don't cite wikis, encyclopedias, overviews, etc. Right. Anybody who gathers a bunch of information from a bunch of different places, and here's the 4-page summary of this issue. Read that if you think it's helpful, right? If you thought the textbook was unclear on a particular point and wasn't a good enough overview, you want to read a different overview, that's great. But as with the textbook, go find their sources. Go find what are their journal articles, what are their credible journalistic sources that they use. That's fine. If they're new enough, if they're current enough, if they're helpful enough, you can cite the research that they did. But don't it's not because Wikipedia is bad. Wikipedia is fine. It's a fine source as far as encyclopedia goes and pedias go. I don't even want you citing Encyclopedia Britannica, because the people who wrote that section are also not an expert on that. They just went and found a bunch of experts and summarized what they found. Most advocacy organizations, not helpful. Right. Especially around environmental issues. A lot of you are really passionate about environmental stuff and went and found people who are like, this company is, and you probably know which, I've already mentioned that company. This company is, and like, they're kind of right in a lot of cases. I mean, they're not entirely off base, but you know, if my whole reason for being is to try to attack a company, like how credible and objective of a source does that make me, right? Again, find their sources. If they're citing independent research, right? Like I found one student cited a source that then cited a United Nations panel. Don't cite the advocacy group, go cite the UN panel of scientists. That's a credible source. That's a credible source. And the UN panel even said what the advocacy group said that they said, but it's not. I don't. Your works cited list, your references is a conversation with the reader, and that's part of how you build your credibility. So citing the UN makes you more credible than citing the advocacy group. There are sometimes other write-ups of the case, right? Like the Daniels Fund, the University of New Mexico, Harvard Business Review, like these, or Harvard Business Publishing. There are so many write-ups of so many cases. And so like, great. I mean, that's fine. I mean, it's just like the back of the textbook. Don't cite that either, right? But go find their sources. If it's new enough, they should have new sources. So go find their source. That's fine. If that helps you jump the line a little bit and find good sources. So for all of these on the right, all of these on the right side, any of these you can track, even a paper mill example, even an example that's like designed to get you to buy a paper from a paper mill. Go to their works cited list and say, is any of this stuff helpful? If so, great, go track it down and then use it. Stay out of there though. That's not a good source. It's just don't. It's best not to get started down that road.